start, let's head back to the 1930s and set the scene a bit. It's the Great Depression, and nearly 30 million Americans are without a job. It's a miserable time, and you, of course, living in this time, are doing everything in your power to just laugh a little. So whether that's by reading a book, listening to your favorite radio show, or possibly flipping to the comic section of the newspaper. Comic strips have been popular for a very long time, but became especially popular during this depression. People enjoyed them so much that they began compiling them into magazines that would become known as a comic book. And one of the most famous publishers of this time was National Allied Publications, who was founded by Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson in 1934. They would soon become known as DC Comics, the name we all recognize, which was actually just an abbreviation of their first famous series, Detective Comics. Shortly after, Timely Comics started producing attention-getting comic books, and they were founded by Martin Goodman. And soon they would change their name to Marvel. Now, there's a huge rivalry between Marvel and DC, but not many people actually know where the two companies got started. I promise I won't be choosing one or the other, but merely be telling you how the companies got their start in the business and how their most famous characters came to be. I'll be talking about both companies in chronological order. So first up is DC Comics who debuted their first superhero in 1938. Just kind of get an idea of what their comics might look like. So as explained by Comic Vine, the largest comic database online, as comic books became more and more popular, more and more people just wanted to get their ideas noticed. So Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, amateur writer and illustrator, moved to New York City in hopes of making their big break in the business. And together they came up with a superhero character from the planet Krypton, and of course we all know him as Superman. Now, no company wanted the superhero because they thought the whole idea of a man with supernatural powers who hailed from this unknown planet who wore a cape and tights was just a really silly idea, so no one hired them. But 5 years later, DC Comics decided to try it out under their Action Comic series, and every copy sold. So after the success, Superman became so successful that it launched the era known as the Golden Age of comic books, which is actually just when the whole idea of a superhero developed. So with the success of Superman, DC decided to try again, and they were no less successful, and they came up with Batman and their first female superhero, Wonder Woman. So next up on our timeline is Marvel in 1939, which is only 1 year later. And to get an idea of what their comics might look like. So soon other companies started to realize the potential of these superhero characters and started to make their own versions. So this is when Marvel came up with their first superhero, the Human Torch, who became really popular and actually kind of gave Marvel their big break. Now Marvel got really well known for using current events to add familiarity to their stories, and this is, at this point in history, World War II was occurring, so they got the writers the idea to incorporate war into their stories, and this is when Captain America was introduced, who was originally named Super America, but later changed because the writers thought super was way overused. So, as explained by Marvel's book, 5 Fabulous Decades of the World's Greatest Comics, this new captain fought war, and as you can see in the first issue, they have him defeating Hitler, which, as crazy as this sounds, this issue in particular was said to have influenced a lot of young men to go to war during this time, which is crazy. So, with the war came success, and with the end of the war came the biggest downfall for both DC and Marvel. The movie Once Upon a Time, The Superheroes talks about how people started criticizing what was in the comics because they had a lot of issues in them like drugs, alcohol, and violence, and they didn't think it was very appropriate for the younger audiences. So a lot of the companies were being forced to censor what they were writing about. So it caused a huge downfall in the sales. But after this downfall, the differences in the two companies became extremely apparent because they were both trying everything in their power to become popular again, but they both went about it in completely different directions. So the book Comic Book Superheroes Unmasked describes the differences really well. They talk about how on one hand we have DC, who in their attempt to reclaim fame decided to merely update old characters. So they just reintroduced their most famous, such as Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman, and just completely gave them new makeovers. And it was really successful, and all the characters became really popular again. And this was also the time that they decided to introduce the first team in comic book history, the Justice League of America. So that was on one hand. On the other hand, we had Marvel, who in their attempt to reclaim fame decided to just start fresh and create a whole new line of characters. And in competition with DC, Marvel decided to make the new characters really personal. So they made them not so flawless so that they were able to really connect with the readers and make them more relatable. So this is when they came out with their first team, the Fantastic Four, and then went on to create other well-known teams such as the Avengers and X-Men, which introduced single characters such as the Hulk, Thor, and Iron Man. And after all these successes, they then came out with one of the biggest successes known to comic book superheroes, which is Spider-Man. So Spider-Man was the first teenage superhero, and so many people were drawn to him because he was human and made human mistakes. So people liked that they could relate to him, and it was really the character that defined Marvel and differentiated it from DC completely. With the creation of Spider-Man, Marvel actually sold out DC in the 1960s, which was the first time this had ever happened, so it was a huge deal. But don't get me wrong, DC characters were no less loved either. This era was known as the Silver Age of comic books and was really the time when the most famous characters that we remember growing up with were developed. So, in conclusion, whether you like DC Comics and Clark Kent, or Marvel Comics and Peter Parker, it's no lie that both companies have created some of the most well-known and beloved characters we love and still love to this day. Although both companies are very different in their writing, style, illustrations, topics, and characters, they both take us to the supernatural world and let their readers escape reality, if only just for a moment.
Nice.